Ahoy there! Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another ship comparison video for Eve Echoes. Now, last week, or maybe a little bit longer, I can't exactly remember, I was scrolling through Reddit, which is a bit of a guilty pleasure of mine and something I try not to do too often for fairly obvious reasons. And there was a really interesting conversation going on about various different cruisers in Eve Echoes, and someone asked me then, which is better, the Vexor II or the Arbitrator III Covert Ops? Basically, if you're a drone pilot, what cruiser should you be flying at tech level 10? And this actually was quite an interesting question to me, and something I've been asked a fair few times in the past as well, through DM and other sort of means of contact. So I thought what I'd do today then is actually sit down and have a look at that question and answer it fully. Which is better, the Vexor II or the Arbitrator III Covert Ops? Both of them are Tech 10 ships, and they both do things a little bit differently, so it's not quite as clear-cut as some people might have you believe. Anyway, if you enjoy this video, please let me know by hitting like on it, sub to the channel for all things Eve Echoes, ding that notification bell to never miss an upload, and of course if you do want to go the extra mile to help support this channel, then you can do so either over on Patreon or on our Redbubble merchandise store, both of which are linked in the description below. Anyway, with all that said and done then, let's have a look at these two cruisers and see if we can figure out which is better, the Vexor II or the Arbitrator III Covert Ops. Now, because this video started with my own personal Sakura Pink Arbitrator III Covert Ops, you guys might think that you have the answer already. Not strictly true. I just really like the Arbitrator line because I'm a Covert Ops pilot and I own every single ship that can fit a Covert Ops cloak, with the exception of the Stratios and any of the Celestis, because screw the banana ships. Anyway, let's then have a look. We're going to have a look first of all then at the Arbitrator III Covert Ops, and then we're going to put this side by side and have a look at the Vexor II as well. So, looking directly at the Arbitrator III Covert Ops, first of all, if you've watched my video on the 5 best ship and worst ship designs in Eve Echoes, you'll know that I love the Arbitrator's look. It was actually my 5th best ship design, and I stand by that. It's a gorgeous looking ship, very angular, very aggressive, and even though it's an Amar ship, I think we can forgive it for that. Now, if we look at its attributes and fittings here, we have, first of all, a profile with 4 drone launching tubes, launching small or medium drones only, 2 high slots, 4 mid slots, 4 low slots, 3 combat rigs, and 3 engineering rigs. Fairly standard power grid output here of 580 megawatts. It's big enough for everything we're ever going to really want to do here, with the, short of oversizing absolutely everything. Pretty solid defenses actually, especially for a Covert Ops ship. This is quite surprising. 18,434. Most of that, of course, is in armor, what with this being an Amar ship. And being an Amar ship, you'd expect pretty solid capacitors as well. Here you can see 2,390. I'll give you a spoiler though, that is actually the same as the Vexor II. So, interestingly enough, the capacitor isn't overly great on the Arbitrator III Covert Ops compared to other Amar ships. But it's not a problem. It's still a good capacitor and does what we need it to. We've got a typical maximum lock targets of 7, which is, standard par for the course at Tech 10. The signature radius of 74.3 actually lies to us here, because as you'll see in a moment, there is a trait description bonus for the Arbitrator III Covert Ops that will reduce that down to 59.44, which is tiny for a cruiser. That is literally destroyer territory signature radius. It doesn't show it here as well, but it's worth noting that the source radius of the RB3CO is 237 meters, so it's still fairly easy to scan down, but you can rig it down quite small to avoid being scanned. Not quite as small as the Bellicose 3 Covert Ops goes though. Scanner resolution is fairly solid at 349 meters, but remember, if you're fitting a Covert Ops cloak, you are getting a penalty of about 40% to that, so it does go down to basically almost battleship level of scan resolution, which is not great if you've got a cloak on. Takes a little bit of time to lock onto a target. Then we have our velocities and agility ratings. So we've got a flight velocity of 288 meters per second, which is fast for a cruiser. A solid warp speed of 4.0 astronomical units per second, and when you combine our mass and inertia together, we get an inertia rating of 5.152, which is not terrible. That's actually pretty good for a cruiser, but it's again not quite as good as some of the other Covert Ops cruisers out there. So on its stat page, what we're looking at here with the Arbitrator III Covert Ops ultimately is surprisingly tanky, pretty solid cruiser that does everything you'd really expect a Tech 10 ship to do. When we go into the trait description here, of course it's a Covert Ops cruiser, so we can fit Covert Ops cloaking devices, and we get a 50% reduction to the lock delay once you drop that cloak. It's still 15 seconds, so you're not really getting the drop on anyone except a battleship, maybe. And of course you can fit it with sinusoidal field generators if you want to be going out and setting up sinusoidal beacons for your fleet. This is a ship that can do that. Then if we look at the skill bonuses, we have Advanced Micro Warp Drive Operation, which is interesting because you don't even need to train into weapon skills for this, and that gives us a 10% increase to Tracking Disruptor Jammer Strength, 50% obviously at full training there. That makes Tracking Disruptors actually surprisingly nasty. If you go up against someone who has sort of turrets in PvP and you hit them with a Tracking Disruptor, or heck, even two of them, and you've skilled into signal disruption as well, you'll find that the Arbitrator 3 Covert Ops' speed, combined with the 50% reduction to the signature radius penalty there for using a micro warp drive, plus that tracking disruptor, means you are ridiculously hard to hit, and you can orbit actually at some pretty good ranges pretty quickly, and just take no damage back because their turrets cannot track you. Bear that in mind. As we come further down though to Advanced Cruiser Command, this is where we start getting our drone skills. This is where the signature radius reduction that I mentioned earlier comes into place. That 74.3 minus 20% for full training there of Advanced Cruiser Command does give us 59.44 meters signature radius, which, as I said, is one of the smallest cruisers out there. There are destroyers bigger than that. We then have 30% drone damage, obviously multiply that out by 5, gives us a total of 150% drone damage, which means the 4 drones that we're using, when you math that out, they work out as 10 drones. We need to remember that, and we'll come back to that later. And then a 3 kilometer, math it out to 15 kilometers at full training, additional drone command range, just gives us a little bit of extra sort of, distance that we can use our drones at. So that's the Arbitrator 3 Covert Ops. What about the Vexor II? Well, let's move across into the Galente Federation ship tree, Tech 10. Here's the Vexor II. I like the look of this ship. This one still glitches out a little bit on me from time to time, as you can see. It looks a little bit like the Needler from Halo, especially if you put that late night skin onto it, the Covenant Needler. Let's see if I can get an image on screen of that. I quite like the look of the Vexor, especially the way that sort of the ports open and close as it activates and deactivates its warp drive. It's a pretty cool looking ship. Looking at its attributes and fittings, we have here a power grid output of 716 megawatts, which is bigger than the Arbitrator, gives us a bit more space as to what we can fit into the different slots here. You'll notice that we have 5 drone tubes as well that can launch small or medium drones, 2 high slots, 3 mid slots, 5 low slots, 3 of each of the rigs. This is a fairly standard setup for a cruiser at tech level 10. Notice though that we've got 3 mid slots but 5 lows. That means we've sacrificed a bit more of our sub-weapon systems, but we have got more tanking options instead. Obviously you can put things like drone damage amplifiers in those mid slots, but I think most people will agree you're going to go for things like armor repairers, armor hardeners, heck, even a damage control unit, as we'll see later, and so on. The defense that we have here, 16,918, is actually lower than the Arbitrator 3 Covert Ops, which honestly surprised me when I was doing this comparison, because I've always assumed that the Vexor II was a lot tankier than the Arbitrator 3, and actually, it's technically on paper lower. So what's going on there? Well, remember you've got 5 low slots. Those 5 low slots give you a lot higher defense overall. If you had the Arbitrator 3 and the Vexor 2 having the same defensive stats, you'll find that actually that 5th low slot shoots the Vexor 2 up into ridiculous tankiness. As it stands, it does work out more tanky than the Arbitrator 3 Covert Ops. You'll find that it can take more sustained firepower, but the Arbitrator 3 Covert Ops arguably is not getting hit, or especially if they're using turrets. Again, there's that capacitor bank, 2,390 gigajoules. That is the same as the RB3 Co. So again, that's very good for a Galente ship. Solid capacitor there, especially since most of the stuff that we're going to be using on this ship doesn't use all that much capacitor. You'd be going for armor tanking modules, which use less capacitor than shield tanking modules, and for the high slots, chances are you're looking at something like missiles. Oh, bit of a spoiler alert there, aren't we? Anyway, maximum lock targets of 7 again, signature radius here of 85.8 is considerably larger than the RB3 Co, especially once you take into consideration the fact that the RB3 Co has that reduction to its signature radius as part of its skills, so you're looking there at 85.8 compared to a theoretical 59.44 on the RB3 Co. Scan resolution may look lower, 303 here native compared to 349, but again, remember that the Arbitrator 3 Covert Ops is probably running a cloak, and that cloak is going to pretty much half the RB3 Co's scan resolution there, so theoretically, in actual operation, the Vexor II is going to have a better scan resolution. That said, I do think the Vexor II scan resolution is a bit low. Like for a Tech 10 cruiser, you'd expect this to be a little bit higher, a little bit faster to lock onto things. Our flight velocity of 262 is, it's okay, it's middling for a cruiser. It's not fantastic, but it's pretty, it's okay. It could be far, far, far worse than it is. Warp speed of 3 astronomical units is lower than the RB3 Co's 4 astronomical units. I should also mention, of course, that flight velocity of 262 is lower than the RB3 Co's 288, but that's to be expected for a Covert Ops ship, I feel. Then if we look at the mass and the inertia, this was another part that actually quite surprised me. The mass and the inertia, when you look at these side by side with the RB3 Co, the mass is only slightly higher. Here it is 11.1 million kilograms, whereas the RB3 Co actually has a mass of 11.2 million kilograms, which astonished me. I thought that being a Covert Ops ship, the RB3 would be the less massive one. The inertia modifier as well, 0.32 compared to the RB3 Co's 0.46. It's a better inertia modifier, and when we take into account the fact that the Vexor II then has a skill bonus to its inertia modifier that drops that all the way down to 0.24, suddenly you've got an agility rating on the Vexor II of 2.664 compared to the Arbitrator III Covert Ops 5.152. This is a considerably more agile ship. Literally, it is twice as agile as the Arbitrator III Covert Ops, which, considering that's a Covert Ops, I personally find astonishing. But there it is, the numbers do not lie. If we look at the trait descriptions here, you'll see obviously the Vexor II loses all those Covert Ops functionality, so it loses the cloak and the Sino fields, but it does get a 5-second increase to damage control activation time, which, again, helps us pump up that tank. If you've got a damage control unit installed on a Vexor II, you go from having 13 seconds of near invulnerability to 18 seconds of near invulnerability, and those 5 additional seconds really can make a difference. Now we're going to come back to the drone skills here at the top. There's the advanced cruiser command bonus for the minus 5% inertia modifier. 25% reduction to inertia modifier is what takes us down to 0.24 on inertia rather than the 0.32, and again, that massively impacts our agility rating and makes the Vexor II an astonishingly nimble cruiser. Then, looking at this advanced medium drone operation skill, assuming that you have equal skills on a Vexor II and an RB3 Co, you've both got, advanced medium drone operation trained at least to level 5. Here, of course, that drone damage is going to multiply out. 5 times 25% is 125%. That looks lower than the RB3 Co's 150%. Remember though I said that the Arbitrator III Covert Ops, that plus 150% means that its 4 drones act as if they are 10 drones. Here, this means that the 5 drones on the Vexor II act as if they're 11.25. That means that you are going to get more DPS out of the Vexor, and chances are you've got a spare low slot as well that you can put a drone damage amplifier on, so you can probably push that up a little bit higher. Of course, we're not taking into consideration the existence or lack thereof of nanocores for either of these two ships, so we're just looking at the basic stats here. We then have the same 3-kilometer drone command range, giving us a total of 15 kilometers additional range at full training, and a 5% or 25% at full training additional drone hit points, which means those drones are going to be, a little bit more solid. They're going to take a little bit more killing. Now, my initial thought was that essentially the Vexor II, compared to the Arbitrator III Covert Ops, you were going to have the Vexor II being a bit more based around the concept of PvP, because it's got that drone damage amplifier, because it's got the EHP stats, and I suppose that's technically true, but arguably then, surely the Arbitrator III Covert Ops, with its cloaking devices, etc., is also a PvP ship. And this is very much the point. They do the same thing in different ways. I'd argue that both of them can be used in PvE. You're probably going to struggle at some of like the medium and the large T10 anomalies if you're doing these. I don't know about high-sec encounters, I'll be honest, I haven't tried, even though I fly the Arbitrator III Covert Ops. Ultimately, you'll find that the Vexor II gets higher DPS and theoretically can have a stronger tank to it, thanks to the damage control activation time and the fifth low slot, but considering that the Arbitrator III Covert Ops is fast, it can be cloaked, and it is such a small ship as well, it means it's very hard to hit. I would say that ultimately an Arbitrator III Covert Ops going up against any enemy ship that has turrets is going to leave that turret ship having a very bad day, whereas the Arbitrator III Covert Ops going up against a missile ship, the missiles can do a little bit more damage to it. The Vexor II, however, taking the same hits as the missiles as the Arbitrator III Covert Ops, would survive longer. Theoretically, the Vexor II hits harder, and it does have more tanking capabilities, but when it comes down to it, the Arbitrator III Covert Ops still puts out a good amount of DPS with good range control, plus it has the ability to avoid gate camps with the Covert Ops cloaking device, plus the tracking disruptor jammer strength just being an absolute godsend, plus its size making it harder to hit. I kind of feel that it doesn't matter if you don't have the tank, because simply put, you're not getting hit in the first place. Between the two then, I find it kind of hard to recommend the Vexor II to anyone who just doesn't love the look of the Vexor. Ultimately, I think if you were to choose between these two ships for anything, PvE, PvP, solo roaming, or fleet roaming, that the Arbitrator III Covert Ops, ultimately I feel, is just going to come out on top here. This, to me, is the better ship, and not just because of how it looks. And again, I do say, it does look freaking awesome. But those are just my thoughts and opinions. I'd love to hear yours in the comment section down below. Are you flying a Vexor II? Are you flying an Arbitrator III Covert Ops? Which do you think is the better ship? What kind of fit are you using? Because one thing I will mention about the Vexor II, in addition to its drone, because of that larger power grid, it can also fit large rapid missiles. And large rapid missiles are very, very powerful, and they do push up the DPS of the Vexor II just that little bit more. I think arguably then, on that note, while I'm thinking about it here, wrapping this all up, the Vexor II, if you want to brawl, then the Vexor II is going to be the better option for you. But for everything else, I think the Arbitrator III Covert Ops really does pull away. And the fact that you can make it this, cute metallic Sakura pink as well, just, that wins it for me. That wins it for me. But let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. Would love to know what you think. Otherwise, folks, thank you for watching right the way to the end. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.